today I want to talk about something I got a question about, and I'm just going to give a very brief introduction and then we'll just move on to a practical bit of the video. Someone asked me whether I could do a video on piston upkeep, and I think that's not a bad idea at all. Generally speaking, when you get a pen that's a piston filler, then you can assume, I'm talking about modern pens, that when it leaves the factory, grease has been added and your piston should run smoothly for a long time. But what can you do yourself to make it a little bit smoother, to make sure it keeps running smoothly, etc. That's what we'll be talking about today. I'll not be talking about vintage pens, although I guess what I show here can be applied to vintage pens, vintage Pelicans for example. Some pens are very difficult to take apart. That's a problem. I show you what I do with those, and that's pretty much all there's to it. So this is just about lubricating pistons. I think if you're a very experienced fountain pen user, I will not have any new insights to offer. But perhaps if you're buying your first piston filler, you're not really sure how to do this, this can be useful. So that's all there's to it. Let's move on to the practical part. I'll show you what to do. Now, if you notice that there's a bit of a weird skip in between, that's because halfway through my camera batteries died and I had to switch them. So, I hope this is going to be useful, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye. Okay, so what I have here is a couple of piston-filled fountain pens, not fountain pens. Some of these are very easy to maintain, others are more difficult. So when it comes to lubricating a piston, you'll find that these two pens, this is a Noodler's Nib Creeper, the regular piston-filled type, and this is a TWSBI Diamond 540. These two are very easy to maintain. So this one, for example, the Noodler's pen, you see the piston moving down in the ink window. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but it's there. And you can just overturn the piston turning knob. Now don't do that with any fountain pen. This one is designed to be used like this, and then it pops off and you can pull out the piston right there. So I think there are two bits you could lubricate here. The first is the piston seal, and the second is these nice little threads that will run in the blind cap, and they can run a bit smoother if you put some silicone grease on there. It's not absolutely necessary, but once in a while I do that. So here we have the grease. This is from the Goulet Pen Company, but you can pick it up at a lot of sources. Anderson Pen sells it, Richard Binder sells it. You can even go to do-it-yourself stores and get 100% clear silicone grease. The problem with that is that if you get the wrong stuff, you may cement your piston shut forever. So I always tend to buy it from a pen store. Then at least I know it may be a little bit more expensive, relatively speaking, but then at least I know I get exactly the right stuff. So since I have some extra grease on my finger, I just put it on those threads, and then I wipe off my finger. Once you've had silicone grease on your finger, be very careful when touching feeds and nibs, because this stuff hampers ink flow. That's why you use it. You don't want ink to pass beyond the piston seal, in addition to lubrication, so be a little careful with the nib and feed, because if you put the grease on there, then you will get problems with your ink flow, most likely. So here you have it. I've greased it up a bit, and now it runs very smoothly, the way I like it. Usually I just twist it a couple of times to make sure the grease gets everywhere, and that's all there's to it. You don't have to use that much. Just a little bit of grease will usually get the job done. Now with a pen like this, TWSBI Diamond, it's very easy. You get a little wrench you can put in there. I have videos on how to do this in more detail if you're interested in one. In a couple of the shootouts I think I show you. But you can just take this pen apart like that and pull out the piston, put some grease on there. I don't have to do it now because I haven't used this pen for a while, so it's okay, but it's really that simple with this pen. And then when you're done, you put that back in place. Make sure you don't over tighten it. It is plastic and it will crack, but here you've got a beautiful smooth piston action. Okay, so those two were easy, but some pens are a little bit more difficult to work with. This is a particularly tough nut to crack, so I'll come back to that in a second. Here we have the Pelican M205 Duo. Very nice pen. I like that this is a demonstrator. That's good for this video, so I can really show you the piston mechanism. As you can see, it runs fairly smoothly, so it really wouldn't be necessary to grease it, but while we're at it, we might as well do so. Now the problem is with this pen, unlike, I mean, it looks like the TWSBI Diamond, right? It has the same type of piston turning knob, and you see those threads, but unfortunately you cannot just take apart this one. So I really wouldn't go there. I wouldn't try to get this off. You can, but it's a lot more complicated to put it back together again, so I really wouldn't do it. You run the risk of ending up with a pen that can no longer be assembled again. They do that in the factory, and I would tend to keep it that way. So what do? Well, in these pens, it's a little bit more difficult to reach this part of the piston mechanism, but you can. With a Pelican pen, with most Pelican pens, what you can do is just grab the nib and feet, put this in the crook of your finger, close up tightly, and then just turn the pen, and you can remove the nib unit. You can just put that apart, or I'm sorry, just put that away for a second, and then you have access to the piston through that hole, right? So what you can do is you can take a Q-tip. As you can see, that fits in there quite easily. So what I always try to do is I take a wallop of the grease and I put it on one side of the Q-tip. Why only on one side? Because I want to push this in. I want to be one side to be clear of grease, so that I can put that on the thread so that I don't get any grease on the feed later on. It's always difficult to do that really well and completely flawlessly, but I will try. So I put it in there, steady hand. You see the grease in there? I'm just putting some grease on the inside wall of the barrel. Sort of coating the barrel now. And then I pull that out in one swift motion. Okay, well that's fairly simple. Is there any grease on the threads? I'm just checking. I don't really see anything, but what I can do is just take the clean end of this Q-tip and just gently run it through the opening of the pen, and I should get some excess grease out if necessary. Then I will just grab the nib and feed unit again, screw that back in place. I'll put the cap on, and well, okay, I would usually put the cap on right now just to show you. I will sort of hold it. The only reason I'm holding it is that there is still some silicone grease flying around here. I don't want to get that on the nib. I'm very peculiar about that. Now what I do is I just operate the piston, and what happens is that the grease is just smeared in an even film over the inside of the barrel, and right now this runs extremely smoothly. There is no resistance as I operate the piston, so the operation succeeded and the patient has survived. Okay, now things get really complicated when it comes to some pens that are very difficult to take apart. Mont Blanc springs to mind. Here I've got a 149. I cannot remove the nib without a special tool, and I cannot remove the piston unit without a special tool. So what do you do if you want to grease the piston? Well, it's complicated. It's really quite complicated. You cannot reach the piston seal as you could on these pens or on that pen. So what I tend to do as a sort of last resort measure, and that's really the only thing I can figure out and do, I could not remove the nib on this Omas 360 as with Mont Blancs. I think there are two notches near the nib. I think you can do it, but this is a vintage pen. I don't want to damage it. I don't want to exert too much pressure. What you can do is you just open up the piston as far as you can, and what you see here, at least I'm hoping you can see that, is that there is clear, let me just grab a probe here so that I can show you. There's an area right there between the piston turning knob and the barrel. Well, you can put some grease on there. Is that going to do a whole lot of good? Well, the results vary a little bit, but at least the turning action will be a bit smoother because you lubricate this part of the piston. And that's really the only thing I could think of. So I'll just take my proboscis, put on some grease. Don't overdo it here. You don't want to have a sticky mess up there. Gently put it in between there and just smear it. You can do this, you don't need a fancy tool like this. This is just a crochet needle, by the way, which I've bent. You can also use a Q-tip, but the problem with a Q-tip usually is that you can't really fit it in there very well. Unless you push down hard, and even then it doesn't usually fit very well. You can use a toothpick. I guess you could use a simple nail, you put in a wall. Of course, be careful you don't scratch anything, but if you just gentle, it should work. And that's pretty much all there's to it. So now I just close up this, twist it a couple of times, and the action is fairly smooth. And that's really all there's to it. So those are just some tips for piston maintenance and upkeep. Don't be alarmed. I mean, a lot of these pens come with grease when they leave the factory, and they should last a lifetime. But if you use your pens quite intensely, then you may want to do this every once in a while, just to make sure that everything is running smoothly. With some pens it's very easy, with others it's just not, and there's nothing you can do about it. So I hope this was useful. If you have any questions, just leave a comment, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.